August 12, 2017, wildlife photographer Megan Sullivan, 31, vanished during a solo expedition in the remote backcountry of Wildwood Eco Resort in northwestern Montana. Her disappearance triggered an extensive search operation across the 5,000-acre private wilderness preserve, which had gained international recognition for its conservation efforts and rare wildlife populations, including several endangered species being rehabilitated under protected conditions. 5 days into the search, with no trace of Sullivan beyond her abandoned camp 3 miles from the main lodge, attention shifted to her colleague Ryan Walsh, 42, the charismatic director of the Wildwood Conservation Foundation that operated the resort and managed its substantial endowment. As investigators examined Sullivan's photographic equipment recovered from her campsite, they uncovered a series of images that shouldn't have existed. Photographs documenting not just the majestic Rocky Mountain wildlife the resort was famous for protecting, but evidence of a sophisticated illegal trafficking operation orchestrated by the very man leading the search for her. What began as a missing person case in the Montana wilderness evolved into an investigation that would expose one of the largest wildlife trafficking schemes in North American history, revealing how Sullivan had unknowingly captured evidence of Walsh's dual crimes: the systematic embezzlement of millions from the Conservation Foundation and the secret sale of the very endangered species he publicly championed saving. The morning mist still clung to the pines when Jason Blackfeet, Wildwood's head wilderness guide, discovered Megan's abandoned campsite. The expedition tent remained perfectly erected, her sleeping bag unrolled inside as if awaiting her return. Her professional equipment, a satellite phone, GPS unit and emergency beacon, sat untouched on a camp table, while only her primary camera and favorite telephoto lens were missing. A half-empty mug of coffee had grown a thin film of mold in the 3 days since she'd last been seen. The ground settled at the bottom like black silt. Nothing suggested a struggle or animal encounter, those most predictable of wilderness hazards. It appeared as though she had simply walked into the forest to capture the morning light and never returned, vanishing into the vast Montana wilderness as completely as the mist now burning off under the August sun. She wouldn't have left camp without her satellite phone, Blackfeet told the search coordinator, his weathered face creased with concern as he surveyed the undisturbed campsite. Megan was meticulous about safety protocols. She'd spent too much time in remote locations to make rookie mistakes. As a member of Wildwood's permanent guide staff, Blackfeet had accompanied Sullivan on numerous photography expeditions throughout the preserve over the previous 18 months, developing both professional respect and friendship with the photographer whose work had recently been featured in National Geographic. "Something's wrong," he added, kneeling to examine a series of partial boot prints leading away from the camp toward Crimson Ridge, an area known for its population of rare mountain wolves that Sullivan had been documenting. Ryan Walsh arrived at the scene shortly before noon, having helicoptered in from the main lodge where he'd been coordinating the initial search efforts. His tall frame moved with purpose through the camp as he questioned Blackfeet about Sullivan's last known communications and planned photography locations. "We need to expand the search perimeter immediately," he announced, his authoritative voice carrying the polished precision of the former investment banker he'd been before his mid-career shift to conservation work. "I want every available guide and ranger combing these ridges before nightfall." To the assembled search team, Walsh projected the image of a concerned executive determined to find his missing colleague, but those closest to him noted a tightness around his eyes that suggested something beyond professional worry. When local sheriff's deputies arrived to officially document the scene, Walsh hovered near Sullivan's equipment cases with unusual attentiveness. "Megan was working on a groundbreaking photo series for our upcoming fundraising gala," he explained as deputies catalogued her belongings. "She was documenting our success, rehabilitating the endangered species in our northern sanctuary, a project worth millions in potential donations." His emphasis on the financial implications struck Deputy Sarah Martinez as oddly prioritized, a detail she noted in her initial report. More significant was Walsh's insistence on personally securing Sullivan's backup hard drives and memory cards to protect the Foundation's intellectual property, despite protocol dictating all belongings remain undisturbed until thoroughly processed by investigators. By day 5 of the search, with helicopter sweeps, cadaver dogs, and dozens of volunteers having found no trace of Sullivan beyond her camp, the investigation shifted from rescue to recovery, and from accident to possible crime. The turning point came when technicians examining Sullivan's laptop discovered a hidden folder containing photographs unlike the majestic wildlife imagery that had built her reputation. These images, taken with telephoto lenses from concealed positions, documented clandestine midnight activities at Wildwood's restricted northern compound. Crates being loaded onto unmarked trucks, exotic animals sedated and handled by unidentified men, and most damning, Ryan Walsh himself overseeing operations that bore no resemblance to legitimate conservation work. As FBI agents joined the investigation, specializing in environmental crimes and financial fraud, the troubling truth began to emerge. Megan Sullivan hadn't simply disappeared in the wilderness. She had stumbled upon secrets worth killing to protect. Detective Jack Reeves of the Montana State Criminal Investigation Division had investigated 8 wilderness disappearances in his 16-year career. Most had ended with the discovery of remains after unfortunate encounters with wildlife or exposure to the elements. As he surveyed Sullivan's meticulous campsite, however, his instincts registered immediate concern. "Everything's too perfect," he noted to his partner, Detective Lisa Greer. "When people get lost or injured in the wilderness, there's chaos, dropped equipment, signs of panic. This looks staged." The investigation's first significant discovery came when forensic technicians found trace blood evidence on leaves approximately 50 yards from the campsite. Blood later confirmed to be Sullivan's through DNA analysis. The pattern and distribution suggested a head wound rather than an animal attack. More telling was the discovery of a partial boot print in the same vicinity that didn't match Sullivan's hiking boots found in her tent. The impression indicated a size 12 men's boot, with a distinctive wear pattern matching the Dana Mountain lights that Ryan Walsh was photographed wearing during recent Foundation events. "Ms. Sullivan's camera is conspicuously missing," Greer observed as they inventoried the photographer's equipment. Professional wildlife photographers typically travel with multiple camera bodies, yet her primary Canon EOS with the 600mm telephoto lens is the only equipment not accounted for. This observation gained significance when technicians recovered recently deleted files from Sullivan's laptop showing she had been photographing not just wolves as officially documented in her assignment brief, but the restricted northern compound where the Foundation housed its critical recovery species, an area Walsh had explicitly declared off-limits to all but essential personnel. Interviews with Wildwood staff revealed subtle but consistent patterns of concern. Megan had been asking questions about the Foundation's northern compound for weeks, reported Anna Lightfoot, Wildwood's communications director. Ryan became increasingly agitated each time she mentioned wanting to document our work with the endangered species housed there. He kept rescheduling her access, claiming quarantine protocols or veterinary procedures. When pressed about Walsh's reaction to these requests, Lightfoot hesitated before adding, "He told me to handle her and keep her focused on the wolves. Said the northern compound work was too sensitive for public documentation at this stage." The investigation accelerated dramatically when FBI forensic accountants discovered financial irregularities in the Wildwood Conservation Foundation's records. Over the previous 3 years, approximately $4.2 million had been diverted from the Foundation's accounts through a sophisticated network of shell companies and offshore accounts. The paperwork authorizing these transfers bore Walsh's signature and that of the Foundation's chief financial officer, Douglas Merrick, who had abruptly resigned 2 months earlier, citing personal health concerns. "Walsh has been systematically bleeding the Foundation dry," explained FBI Special Agent Catherine Woodward, who specialized in financial crimes. "He's created a perfect embezzlement scheme disguised as conservation work, invoicing for non-existent equipment, inflating costs for animal acquisition and care, and funneling donations through dummy corporations he controls." More disturbing was evidence suggesting the embezzlement was merely a secondary operation to a more lucrative criminal enterprise, the illegal trafficking of endangered species to private collectors worldwide. The breakthrough came when technicians recovered deleted images from Sullivan's cloud backup account, accessed through her laptop credentials. The photographs methodically documented activities at the northern compound over a 3-month period. Exotic animals arriving in specialized containment units, being briefly housed in the Foundation's facilities, then disappearing, often replaced by visually similar but distinctly different individuals of the same species. Sullivan had captured evidence suggesting Walsh was using the legitimate conservation operation as cover for a black market exchange, selling truly rare animals to wealthy private collectors, while replacing them with more common specimens to maintain the appearance of ongoing conservation work. Most damning was a series of night vision images showing Walsh personally overseeing the loading of transport crates onto a private cargo plane at Wildwood's small airstrip. The metadata revealed these photos were taken just 2 nights before Sullivan's disappearance. In one image, Walsh could be seen examining documents alongside a man later identified as Anton Kuzlov, a known facilitator for wildlife trafficking operations connected to oligarchs in Eastern Europe and Asia. "She was building a case," Reeves concluded as the investigation team assembled the evidence. "Sullivan wasn't just taking pretty pictures of wolves, she was systematically documenting criminal activity. And based on her organized approach, I'd bet she was preparing to take this information to authorities." When agents executed a search warrant on Walsh's private office at the Wildwood Lodge, they discovered a hidden safe containing $260,000 in cash, multiple passports under different names, and a handwritten list of clients with specific endangered species requests. What they didn't find was any trace of Sullivan's missing camera, the one piece of evidence that likely contained the most recent and damning documentation of Walsh's operation. Megan Sullivan and Ryan Walsh had first crossed paths at a conservation photography exhibition in Seattle in 2015. Sullivan, already building a reputation for her intimate wildlife portraits that captured both the majesty and vulnerability of endangered species, had been showcasing her work from assignments in Alaska and the Pacific Northwest. Walsh, recently appointed as director of the Wildwood Conservation Foundation, after a much-publicized career change from Wall Street to wildlife protection, was seeking photographers to document the Foundation's expanding work with endangered species rehabilitation. "He was incredibly charismatic," recalled Marcus Chen, a fellow photographer who witnessed their first meeting. "Ryan had this way of making you feel like your work wasn't just art, but vital documentation for saving species. He convinced several of us that night that photography was essential to conservation funding, that the right images could open checkbooks that scientific papers couldn't." For Sullivan, whose passion for wildlife had driven her career choices since college, Walsh's proposition represented the perfect alignment of purpose and profession. Long-term access to rare species in a protected environment, with her images directly contributing to their conservation. The Wildwood Conservation Foundation had been established in 1992 by billionaire technology pioneer Alan Parkman, who had purchased 5,000 acres of pristine Montana wilderness and dedicated it to wildlife conservation and research. Following Parkman's death in 2013, control of the foundation passed to a board of trustees who had recruited Walsh to modernize its approach and expand its funding base. Walsh's background as a Goldman Sachs investment banker, specializing in environmental markets, made him an unconventional but compelling choice to lead the organization into a new era of conservation entrepreneurship, as he termed it. Ryan transformed Wildwood's financial model almost overnight, explained board member Elaine Henderson. He introduced tiered donor experiences, exclusive photography safaris for major contributors, and corporate partnership programs that doubled our operating budget within 18 months. What the board didn't realize was that Walsh's financial wizardry masked systematic theft, with fabricated costs and inflated invoices allowing him to siphon millions while still showing impressive growth in the foundation's public financial reports. Sullivan had relocated to Montana in early 2016, accepting a position as Wildwood's resident photographer with a generous stipend and accommodations at the resort. Her assignment seemed straightforward: document the foundation's conservation successes, creating compelling imagery for fundraising materials, social media, and a planned coffee table book highlighting Wildwood's work. Walsh had personally recruited her, promising unprecedented access to endangered species rehabilitation programs that were typically closed to outside documentation. Megan was ecstatic about the opportunity, her sister Jennifer Sullivan told investigators. She said it was the perfect intersection of her photography skills and conservation values, that her images would directly help protect the species she cared so deeply about. This alignment of purpose initially created a strong professional bond between Sullivan and Walsh, with the photographer producing striking imagery that helped the foundation secure several major grants and donations throughout 2016. The first fractures in their relationship appeared in February 2017, when Sullivan began requesting access to the northern compound where the most endangered species were housed. Walsh repeatedly deflected these requests with plausible but increasingly contradictory explanations. He kept moving the goalposts, recalled Jason Blackfeet. First, it was quarantine protocols, then construction issues, then concerns about disturbing breeding pairs. Megan grew frustrated because documenting these species had been a central promise when she took the position. Unknown to Sullivan, the northern compound served as the operational center for Walsh's true enterprise. While Wildwood did house some legitimate rehabilitation programs, the compound's restricted areas contained temporary holding facilities for a rotating inventory of highly valuable endangered species procured through questionable channels and destined for private collections worldwide. The operation had begun as a relatively small side business, the occasional rare bird or reptile diverted to a wealthy collector, but had expanded under the protection of Wildwood's legitimate conservation reputation and Walsh's growing network of international connections. Sullivan's persistence in seeking access to the northern compound coincided with her growing concerns about financial discrepancies she had noticed while preparing caption information for her photographs. Species that had been prominently featured in donor materials as conservation successes were inexplicably no longer available for documentation. Equipment purchases she had been asked to photograph for grant reports didn't match what she observed in actual use around the facility. Most troublingly, she had begun to notice physical differences in certain individual animals she had photographed repeatedly, subtle but distinct variations that suggested they were not the same specimens, despite being presented as such. "She called me in June, unusually agitated," Jennifer Sullivan recalled. "She mentioned documenting something she wasn't supposed to see during a dawn shoot near the northern compound. Trucks arriving in the middle of the night, animals being moved without proper protocols. When she asked Walsh about it, he became defensive and restricted her photography zones to areas further from the compound." This conversation had prompted Sullivan to begin her own covert documentation, using her wildlife photography skills to maintain distant observation points and long telephoto lenses to record activities without detection. By July 2017, Sullivan had compiled substantial photographic evidence suggesting illegal activities, though she hadn't yet pieced together the full scope of Walsh's operation. Her personal journal, recovered from her laptop, revealed growing moral conflict about how to proceed. If what I'm seeing is what I think it is, the Foundation's entire conservation mission is compromised, but going public could destroy legitimate protection for dozens of species that depend on wildwood. Need more evidence before making accusations that could do more harm than good. Walsh, meanwhile, had become increasingly aware of Sullivan's unauthorized documentation. Security logs showed he had accessed her work computer twice in late July, likely discovering her hidden folder of incriminating photographs. Lodge staff reported overhearing a heated argument between Walsh and Sullivan approximately 2 weeks before her disappearance, with Walsh's voice raised enough to be heard through his closed office door. "You don't understand what's at stake here. Some lines get crossed for the greater good. You need to trust the process or find another assignment." What Sullivan could not have known was the depth of Walsh's entanglement with international wildlife trafficking networks. Financial records uncovered during the investigation revealed that Walsh owed substantial sums to Eastern European partners who had fronted capital for his operation. With a major transfer of high-value species scheduled for mid-August 2017 and Sullivan's growing documentation threatening exposure, Walsh faced not only legal jeopardy but potential retribution from criminal partners if deliveries were compromised. As Sullivan prepared for her final photography expedition to document Wildwood's wolf population, the stage was set for a deadly confrontation in the Montana wilderness. August 11th, 2017, 8:15 a.m. The morning dawned clear and cool over Wildwood Eco Resort, the kind of pristine Montana summer day that typically filled Megan Sullivan with anticipation for the perfect light conditions. She sat at her laptop in her small cabin near the main lodge, reviewing images from her covert documentation of the northern compound. The photographs showed clear evidence of irregular activities: crates with air holes being loaded onto trucks in the middle of the night, documentation being exchanged with unidentified visitors, and most damning, a snow leopard she had previously photographed as part of Wildwood's successful breeding program being moved into a specialized transport container rather than the habitation area where donors believed it resided. 9:30 a.m. Sullivan encrypted the most incriminating images and uploaded them to a secure cloud account as insurance before packing her equipment for the wolf photography expedition. She had officially scheduled the trip to complete her documentation of Wildwood's wolf rehabilitation program, but her journal entry that morning revealed additional motives. Using wolf assignment as cover to access Northeast Ridge overlooking the airstrip, sources suggest major shipment arriving tonight. Need clear documentation of what species are being moved and who's involved. 10:15 a.m. Ryan Walsh stopped by Sullivan's cabin unannounced, his casual demeanor belied by the tension evident in his posture. "All set for your wolf shoot?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe while his eyes surveyed her packed equipment. "Jason says the Crimson Ridge Pack has been especially active near the Eastern Valley. Should make for some spectacular shots." When Sullivan mentioned potentially extending her stay an extra day to capture different lighting conditions, Walsh's response was unusually insistent. "Actually, we need you back by tomorrow afternoon. Major donor flying in who wants to meet the photographer behind those amazing snow leopard images." 11:40 a.m. Sullivan met with Jason Blackfeet for a final review of her planned route and camping location. Megan seemed distracted, Blackfeet later told investigators. She kept checking her phone and asked unusual questions about night visibility from Crimson Ridge toward the airstrip. I offered to accompany her, but she insisted on going solo, said the wolves were more natural when only one human was present. Before departing, Sullivan gave Blackfeet a sealed envelope with instructions to open it if she didn't return as scheduled, a precaution she had never previously taken. 1:05 p.m. Security cameras at the main gate captured Sullivan's jeep heading toward the trailhead for Crimson Ridge. Lodge records show Walsh made 3 calls to the northern compound immediately after her departure, followed by an encrypted satellite phone call lasting approximately 4 minutes. Cell tower data would later place this call to a number associated with Anton Kozlov, the wildlife trafficking facilitator who was scheduled to arrive that evening. 3:30 p.m. Sullivan established her campsite in a small clearing near a stream, approximately 3 miles from the main lodge, but positioned with clear sightlines to both the wolf pack's known territory and, crucially, a distant view of Wildwood's private airstrip. She set up her primary photography blind, facing the valley where wolves typically hunted at dawn and dusk, but also established a secondary position behind her tent, with her telephoto lens aimed toward the airstrip, disguised with natural camouflage. 6:45 p.m. Sullivan captured her last normal wildlife photographs, striking images of the alpha female from the Crimson Ridge Pack leading a hunting formation at sunset. Her camera's GPS metadata placed her in the expected location for wolf photography, maintaining her cover story. After twilight, however, the metadata revealed her movement to the secondary position overlooking the distant airstrip. Her final journal entry, tapped into her phone at 7:38 p.m., read, "Unusual activity at airstrip. 2 unmarked vans arrived. Ryan present with unknown men, setting up night vision for documentation when plane arrives. If suspicions confirmed, contacting Wildlife Service tomorrow." 9:22 p.m. Sullivan's camera recorded a series of images showing a small cargo plane landing at Wildwood's airstrip. The high-powered telephoto lens captured clear images of crates being unloaded and transferred to waiting vehicles under Walsh's supervision. Most significantly, several frames clearly documented the distinctive markings of a Siberian tiger cub, a critically endangered species with a black market value exceeding $500,000, being transferred between containers. These images, automatically uploaded to her cloud account through her camera's wireless connection, would later provide crucial evidence. 10:17 p.m. Resort security logs show Ryan Walsh officially signing out in his personal vehicle, informing gate staff he was heading into town for a late meeting. Instead, cell tower data placed his phone traveling toward Crimson Ridge. Approximately 40 minutes would have been required to reach Sullivan's campsite by vehicle and foot from the main gate. 11:05 p.m. The last image from Sullivan's camera captured a flashlight beam approaching her concealed position from the direction of the service road. The camera continued recording for 3 more minutes before transmission abruptly ceased. Satellite phone records indicate Sullivan attempted to make a call at 11:09 p.m., but the connection failed after 6 seconds. August 12, 2017, 12:30 a.m. Security cameras recorded Walsh returning to the resort, signing in at the main gate at 12:43 a.m. Night staff reported he went directly to his cabin, emerging 30 minutes later in clean clothes. He then proceeded to the northern compound, where lights remained on until approximately 3:15 a.m. Cargo vehicle tracking data showed 2 Foundation trucks departing Wildwood at 4:10 a.m., heading toward a private airfield across the Canadian border. 7:15 a.m. Walsh reported for a scheduled Foundation meeting, appearing unusually fatigued but focused, according to staff accounts. When Sullivan failed to check in via radio for her planned morning update, Walsh showed no initial concern, suggesting she might be tracking wolf movement off-trail. Only after Blackfeet expressed worry about the missed check-in did Walsh authorize a preliminary search, carefully directing teams away from the route he had taken the previous night. 10:30 a.m. Jason Blackfeet, increasingly concerned and finding Walsh's suggested search areas unproductive, broke protocol to check Sullivan's most likely photography locations based on his personal knowledge of her habits. This independent initiative led to the discovery of her abandoned campsite, with the meticulous arrangement that would later raise investigators' suspicions. By the time Walsh arrived via helicopter at noon, Blackfeet had already noted the missing camera and contacted local authorities. 2:15 p.m. While search teams combed the surrounding wilderness, Walsh returned to the main lodge, where security footage showed him entering Sullivan's office and accessing her computer for approximately 17 minutes. IT records would later reveal attempted deletions of her cloud storage accounts and emails during this time frame, attempts that failed due to password changes Sullivan had implemented before her final expedition. When Walsh emerged from her office, his facial expression betrayed clear distress, visible even on the grainy security footage. 5:40 p.m. Remembering Sullivan's sealed envelope, Blackfeet opened it while search operations continued. Inside, he found a USB drive and a handwritten note. "Jason, if anything happens to me, please deliver this directly to authorities. Contains evidence of illegal activities at Wildwood involving endangered species trafficking. Trust no one from management. Megan." This discovery prompted Blackfeet to quietly contact his cousin, a tribal police officer, initiating the chain of events that would bring state and federal investigators to Wildwood within hours. The arrest of Ryan Walsh occurred on August 18, 2017, 6 days after Megan Sullivan's disappearance and hours after recovery. Teams discovered her remains in a remote ravine 5 miles from her campsite. FBI agents, supported by wildlife trafficking specialists from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, took Walsh into custody during an emergency board meeting he had called, ostensibly to discuss crisis management regarding the tragic accident. The evidence against him had accumulated rapidly: financial records documenting years of embezzlement, Sullivan's meticulous photographic documentation of trafficking activities, and DNA evidence connecting him directly to the crime scene. "Walsh created the perfect cover operation," explained U.S. Attorney Melissa Chapman during a press conference announcing the indictment. He leveraged the Foundation's legitimate conservation reputation to facilitate a sophisticated trafficking network moving endangered species between Asia, Europe, and private collections in North America. The estimated value of animals trafficked during his tenure exceeds $15 million, while the Foundation's losses through embezzlement approach $4.2 million. Most damning was evidence recovered from Walsh's private server, a client list including oligarchs, celebrities, and even royalty who had purchased rare species through his network. The forensic investigation revealed the full sequence of Sullivan's final hours. Blood evidence and damaged vegetation indicated she had been attacked from behind while photographing activities at the airstrip. Her camera, containing the most recent and damning images, had been taken by Walsh, who later destroyed it in an industrial incinerator at the northern compound. What Walsh hadn't anticipated was Sullivan's automated cloud backup system, which had already transmitted the crucial photographs documenting his involvement with the trafficking operation. The recovery of her body, which Walsh had transported to a remote location and concealed beneath rocks and fallen timber, provided the final physical evidence connecting him to the murder. The trial, held in federal court in Missoula in March 2018, became one of the most closely watched wildlife crime cases in U.S. history. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence of both financial crimes and wildlife trafficking, with Sullivan's photographs serving as the centerpiece of their case. Perhaps most powerful was testimony from Jason Blackfeet, who described finding Sullivan's hidden message and the psychological toll of realizing the organization he had dedicated years to had been corrupted from within. "Megan died because she believed some things are worth protecting at any cost," he testified, his voice breaking. "She used her talent to document truth even when that truth was dangerous." Walsh's defense team attempted to portray the trafficking operation as a necessary evil to fund legitimate conservation work, arguing that traditional donation models couldn't support the expensive reality of species protection. This strategy collapsed when financial records clearly demonstrated that proceeds from illegal trafficking had funded Walsh's lavish lifestyle rather than conservation efforts, including properties in 5 countries, a yacht moored in Monaco, and over $3 million in art and antiquities. After 7 days of testimony, the jury deliberated for less than 5 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges: first-degree murder, embezzlement, conspiracy, wildlife trafficking, and multiple violations of the Endangered Species Act. The judge, delivering a scathing assessment of Walsh's actions, sentenced him to life imprisonment without possibility of parole for Sullivan's murder, plus 30 years for the financial and wildlife crimes. "You betrayed not just your organization's trust and took an innocent life," she stated during sentencing, "but you betrayed the very cause of conservation you claimed to champion. Your crimes have done incalculable damage to legitimate protection efforts worldwide by undermining public trust in conservation organizations." The exposure of Walsh's operation sent shockwaves through the conservation community, prompting increased scrutiny of wildlife foundations and their leadership. The Wildwood Conservation Foundation, its reputation severely damaged, underwent complete restructuring under the supervision of a court-appointed trustee. Most significantly, the investigation led to an international task force that would ultimately dismantle 3 connected trafficking networks across 12 countries, recovering over 200 illegally obtained endangered animals and leading to 43 additional arrests. Sullivan's legacy extended far beyond her tragic death. Her photographs, both the wildlife portraits that had built her reputation and the evidence documentation that cost her life, were exhibited at the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History in a special installation titled "Exposure: The Wild Truth." The Megan Sullivan Fund for Conservation Transparency was established with proceeds from her published works, providing grants for journalists and photographers documenting potential abuses in wildlife protection efforts. Perhaps most fittingly, the northeastern section of Wildwood Preserve, including Crimson Ridge where she spent her final days, was renamed the Sullivan Wildlife Sanctuary, permanently protected from development and dedicated to the ethical conservation principles she had died defending. At the sanctuary's dedication ceremony, Jennifer Sullivan unveiled a simple stone marker bearing her sister's favorite quote beside one of her most powerful wolf photographs. "The camera is an instrument of truth. Where we point it matters. What we expose matters more." For the wolves of Crimson Ridge, now truly protected rather than exploited, and for the conservation community fundamentally reformed by one photographer's courage, those words represented not just a memorial, but a mission that would continue long after her final exposure.